As I sat on the floor of my bedroom, the world around me grew hazy. To say I was exhausted would be an understatement. Before this week began, I couldn't have imagined that I would be here, at this moment, doing what I was doing. As I stood up, I felt the texture of the carpet on my damp hands. A few years ago, Kelly and I had spent a lot of money on furnishing our bedroom. It had nice flooring and a high-quality Australian wool carpet. It was a shame that the carpet was now ruined. I closed my eyes for a moment and shook my head slightly, trying to dispel the fog that had descended on my mind. What the hell am I doing? I thought. I'm better than this, I thought for a moment. Opening my eyes, I looked at the large double bed with wooden frames. When I blinked again, Kelly's image appeared before me. I trembled, realizing that this would never happen again. Things were spiraling out of control. I brought my hands to my face and smiled wildly as I watched the warm, wet blood from my hands smear across my face. I dropped my hands to my sides and continued it to ruin the carpet with the moisture flowing out of me. The world around me blurred, but my gaze quickly caught the glint of a half-empty bottle of whiskey lying on the bed next to an empty pill bottle. I dropped the bottle and swallowed the pills, forgetting to close the lid. Now the smell of whiskey filled the room. I laughed bitterly and shrugged, but then a panicked thought flashed through my mind. The letters. I quickly turned my head and saw that they were still there, with my clumsy handwriting on the envelopes. They were lying on the nightstand, not on the mattress as I had thought a few minutes ago, where the open bottle would have destroyed them. There was always a risk that the wrong person would find my letters, but I dismissed the thought as soon as it entered my head. The only sane part of my brain understood that I wouldn't be around to worry about it, so there was nothing I could do about it. I coughed briefly, feeling bile rising in my stomach. I wasn't nauseous, so I fought the feeling. Why? Closing my eyes, I asked myself why this had happened. Why did I have to do this? Of course, there were people I would miss, although I didn't think they would miss me. Of course, my daughter would hate me for my behavior, but I decided she already hated me, having rejected me with disgust last week, and I, in turn, couldn't take it anymore. I didn't want this pain anymore. Even now, as the life fluid circulating in our bodies continued to flow out of me, ruining the carpet, the pain and suffering remained. The person I was a week ago would have beaten me up for this next week. The person I was then would not have gone to such extremes, but I was no longer that person. I was broken, unwanted, despised, and saw no other way out but to give them everything they wanted. I closed my eyes and grimaced again at the pain in my wrists, but thanks to the pills and whiskey, it was more dull than sharp and excruciating. As I drifted into eternal sleep, my whole life did not flash before my eyes. There were no bright tunnels or staircases painted an alarming red in the darkness. I was somewhat surprised. I guess I was expecting something. No, that was wrong, because I knew that only minutes remained. I felt fear. The struggle of my synapses trying to piece together coherent thoughts was coming to an end. My brain was trying to hold on to life, even though I could no longer stop the inevitable march toward death. Now I felt stupid. I wanted to live. With one last effort to come to terms with my stupidity, I tried to move, but felt myself fall powerlessly to the floor, and blackness finally engulfed me. A week earlier, I was laughing happily, spinning around my daughter Grace in the yard of our home in the suburbs of Perth, Australia. She was 19, and last night her boyfriend John had proposed to her. Of course, I knew it was coming. He came up to me and asked if I would give my blessing. I said yes without hesitation. Grace and John had been dating since 8th grade, and I could count on one hand the number of weekends they had spent apart since they started dating. Grace told my wife Kelly and me about the proposal. John sent her on a treasure hunt, took her all over town, and then led her to a tree in Kings Park, where he proposed. When they told us about it in the kitchen the next day, I hugged her and spun her around like a 5-year-old girl. I was so happy for them. Despite their youth, I knew their love was strong. I believe that if there was a young couple in our time who had the courage to do this, it was these two. I took my daughter's hand again and smiled as I looked at the engagement ring. "It's beautiful, Gracie," I said, looking at John. "You picked it well." My wife Kelly snorted, sitting across the kitchen table. At 42, Kelly was still a beautiful woman in my eyes. She was a dark-haired brunette with hazel eyes and tanned skin that many women envied. We all turned to look at her as she snorted in response to my compliment. "You should thank me," my wife said, raising her wine glass. "You may be lucky, but I'm the one who helped John choose it." I was shocked and noticed that John had clearly blushed. "Mom, that was inappropriate," Grace said, turning to her fiancé. It's okay, honey. I like it, and I know you made the final choice. Nothing else was said, but I have to admit that Kelly's comment made me feel a little uncomfortable. In all the years we've been together, I've never heard my wife say anything so disrespectful and out of character that it would make everyone feel awkward. But thinking about it, I can say with certainty that Kelly had been acting a little strange over the past few months. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at the time, but there were little things, comments, and actions that weren't characteristic of the loving woman I knew, and they were coming out in the woman who had just embarrassed us. Dinner was festive, and we continued to raise toasts and celebrate the engagement. Finally, Grace and John left after dessert, which was apple crumble and vanilla custard that I had made the day before. They had a small one-bedroom apartment that they rented with our help while they were in college and building their careers. That night, when Kelly and I went to bed, I didn't say anything, but I have to admit that her inappropriate comment kept running through my mind. On Sunday morning, Kelly and I woke up slowly, not thinking much about the previous day. We went about our business, then suddenly looked over at her when she went into the bathroom, leaving me there unfinished. I was stunned. "Kelly?" I asked. "What is it?" She replied in a slightly annoyed voice from the bathroom. "Don't I need anything?" I asked. A minute passed before I heard her reply, "I'm washing my face." It took me about half an hour to collect my thoughts. I was so shaken. I took a shower, and when I walked into the kitchen, Kelly was gone. She had left a note saying she was leaving. Suddenly, I felt angry. In all the years I had known Kelly, she had never been so disrespectful to me as she had been that morning. I had no idea what was going on with my wife. I made myself some coffee and kept coming back to the same thought. Is she cheating on me? I was finishing my coffee, pondering this question, when Roger, one of my closest friends, called. "Hey, Bart, how's it going?" he chirped. I answered the phone with a casual greeting. "Bart, buddy, what's wrong?" Roger asked. I spent the next 10 minutes explaining my thoughts to Roger, and he laughed at me. "Buddy, if she's cheating on you, there's not much you can do. Divorce is 50-50, and she's unemployed. So she'll clean you out," he said. "That won't help," I replied, a little annoyed by his attitude. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I'm just trying to be realistic," said Roger, completely unsympathetic. "Listen, let's talk about this tomorrow at work. We need to prepare the report on the Pembroke project. We'll talk later." "Okay," I replied without much enthusiasm. Roger was not only a good friend, but also my colleague. I was a senior engineer and he was a program manager. Over the years, we had formed a good team. I developed solutions and he managed finances and schedules. Somehow, I made it to Sunday. Kelly came home but went to bed at almost midnight. She didn't say anything, even though she knew I was awake. The next day, Kelly tried to be nice. "It's not going to work, Kelly," I said, getting out of bed. "Are you going to break up with me?" she replied, looking at me suspiciously. I looked at her and then started putting on my suit. "I'm not going to touch you after the way you treated me last weekend. I swear if you cheat on me—" I blushed, not knowing how to finish my thought. "You'll do the same thing Bartholomew Crabbe did. There's nothing you can do." When she said my full name, a slight smile appeared on her face. She softened a little, but not completely. "Listen, go back to bed. I need to get off, and I'm sure you can too." She tried to persuade me. I shook my head. Who the hell was this woman? "No, you can't, Kelly. I don't think you realize how much contempt you show me." "Well, screw you," she said. I shook my head and left the room. For the first time in 21 years of marriage, I felt disgust for my wife. I was on edge at the office that day. My assistant, Myra, looked at me with concern. "Bart, are you okay? You look out of sorts," she said with a worried expression. Myra Brown had been my assistant at work for 10 years. She liked to say she had been hired out of pity. When Myra joined the company, her boyfriend was abusive. After they broke up and Myra was forced to leave home, she came to the interview with a black eye, desperate for a job as a secretary. Except for the bruise, which faded quickly, Myra was well suited for the job. She dressed conservatively for the most part, but it was hard to hide how stunning she looked. Myra was very intelligent, picked up almost everything we did easily, and was witty in every way. The owner of the firm hired her but assigned her to me as an assistant, deciding that Myra wasn't smart enough to work with me on projects. I respected Myra also because she genuinely cared about everyone around her and had an absolute moral code. She was friendly until you crossed her, and then you were dead to her. People were fired from the company for crossing her or thinking she was just a dumb pretty girl. And then they learned that her anger was not to be trifled with. I looked at Myra, trying to decide what to tell her about the situation with Kelly. Finally, I sighed and told her the truth. Myra frowned for a few moments after I started talking, but by the end, indignation flushed her cheeks. After I finished, I lowered my head, feeling somewhat depressed that my wife might be cheating on me. I don't know what to do, Myra. If she's cheating on me, I didn't expect it, I said sadly. Suddenly, I felt Myra's hand on my shoulder. In all the years we had been together, I could count on the fingers of both hands the number of times we had touched each other. I looked up and saw compassion in her eyes. Well, said Myra, first you need to go to your meeting at Pembroke. I got the schedule a few minutes ago and there are questions about pipes and concrete used in construction. I felt like I was back in that moment. What? Why am I hearing about this for the first time? Roger didn't tell me anything, I replied. My mind was racing with thoughts of structures, architectural plans, and the amounts I had budgeted. Myra looked concerned. I don't know why you weren't told, Bart. I just read the agenda, and it's cause for concern. A few moments later, without giving us time to think about it, Roger popped into my office. Are you ready, buddy? He asked, smiling at me. Roger, what's the problem with the pipes and concrete on the Pembroke project? I asked quietly, trying to prepare myself for the upcoming meeting. He dismissed my question. Don't worry, we'll sort it out right away. Roger, you know I need to know these things before I meet with a client, I said. It's all right, buddy. We'll sort it out, Roger replied in a rather dismissive tone. The meeting turned out to be an ambush. When we walked in, the owners of Pembroke were already there. I had met them several times, and they had always been friendly. However, when I told them how things were going, they frowned, and their faces grew darker as I spoke. Well, what about the concrete and pipe overruns in the Northeast? Asked Peter, the majority owner and CEO. I looked at Roger. He shrugged, saying nothing. Everyone looked at me. I'll have to check because I haven't heard anything about overruns. However, based on last week's figures, everything was within normal limits. Peter frowned. That can't be true. Explain to me why I signed off on the last 3 months of tender reports totaling over $200,000 for additional concrete and pipes, Peter said, looking at me. I stared at him, not knowing what to say. I looked back at Roger, his face unreadable, but he pulled out the folder and stood up. Gentlemen, if you'll let us take a look at this, I'm sure we can sort everything out. He looked at me. Bart, let's step outside for a minute and figure this out. I followed Roger across the hall into another room where our boss, Clarence, was waiting for us. Well, what did they say? Clarence asked when we sat down. Roger jumped up before I could say a word. He handed the folder to Clarence. They asked about the missing materials, just as we suspected, Roger replied. Clarence looked at me, and for the first time in all the years I had worked for him, I saw anger directed at me in his eyes. What do you say, Bartholomew? The elderly man almost hissed at me. I was shocked by the sharpness of his tone and the hostile look he gave me. I don't know what to say, sir. Last week, I reported to you that everything was going according to plan, that no additional materials were required, and that I knew nothing about these signed statements. I certainly did not approve them, I replied to my clearly angry boss, feeling that the situation was getting out of control. He looked at me critically and opened the folder Roger had handed him. So you insist on this? Clarence asked sharply. Sir? I asked. Then I looked at Roger. He was serious. Bartholomew, I have documents here for $206,000. I am concerned that the payments were made to a bank account that, as it turns out, is in your name. Seriously, Bartholomew? Is this how you treat me after all these years? Clarence almost shouted at me. After that, the meeting was over. Clarence and Roger took turns accusing me of what they said I had done. Neither of them wanted to hear about my innocence. Then they brought in a representative from Human Resources, and I was fired for fraud. Clarence told me he would report the matter to the police, and to top it all off, Myra would also be fired because she worked so closely with me and must have known about everything. As I was being escorted out of the building with some of my belongings, I saw Roger smirking, thinking I wasn't looking. I caught up with Myra in the parking lot in front of the building, with security watching us to make sure we didn't go back in. She was standing by her car, stunned and crying. Myra, are you okay? I asked, and she turned sharply toward me. You bastard, Bartholomew. $200,000 of fraud. How could you? I trusted you, and you cost me my job. the distraught and devastated woman yelled at me. Myra, it wasn't me, I pleaded. Not you? She fell silent and a smirk appeared on her face. Before they pushed me out the door, Roger showed me the signed statements. I saw your signature, I know it. How could you? She looked at me again. I saw the hatred in her eyes, directed solely at me. She didn't want to hear that I had nothing to do with it. And I suppose that touching story about Kelly was a lie too, when I told you she was cheating on you. Seriously, do you think I don't notice the way you look at me when you think I'm not looking? Once again, I was caught off guard by the look of pure, unadulterated hatred in the woman I had worked with for 10 years. I hate you, she spat. You ruined all my chances of finding a new job. I can't believe I was ever lucky enough to feel sorry for you. You lie, cheat, steal, and then you have the nerve to ask me how I feel. Get out of my life, Bart. In all the years we had been together, I had never heard her swear. Her words left me in shock. But before I could say or do anything, she hit me hard across the face. You ruined my career, I can't get a recommendation, and what's worse, I'm tainted by your cheating. I hope it was worth it, you bastard. I stood there stunned, my cheek stinging from her rather hard slap. Myra stared at me for a moment, then got into her car and drove away without saying a word. Not knowing what to do, I drove home and parked in the driveway. Kelly was waiting for me in the house. So the cheater is back with his tail between his legs. Pathetic, she spat. I didn't pay any attention to it at the time, but in the days that followed, I noticed that Kelly's voice sounded happy. Not upset or worried, but happy. What the hell was going on? Kelly, I didn't do anything. I don't know what's going on, I said, stunned, confused, and feeling like I was about to break down. She smirked. What does it matter, Bart? I'm telling you this so you'll get out of here. I had never seen such a contemptuous look before, except maybe from Myra, a moment earlier. There was a knock at the door. You, she said, still growling at me. Without hesitation, I opened the door and found a man in a suit standing there. Mr. Bartholomew Other? He asked. I nodded. This is for you. He handed me a thick envelope and left. I looked inside the envelope and pulled out the divorce papers. Kelly, divorce? Feeling my world crumble, Kelly sensed my growing anguish and laughed at my pain. You're such an ignorant fool, aren't you? Of course it's divorce. In case you haven't noticed, I've been seeing the same man for 6 months. He's where you're not, he's interesting, and of course he has decent money. She looked at me like I was something to be scraped off her shoe. And you have no job, no family, no friends. And let's not forget that by the end of the month, you'll probably be in jail for fraud. She glanced at me briefly, and a sadistic smile flashed across her eyes. I had noticed that look more and more often over the past few months. I didn't understand why I was only seeing it now. You're pathetic, Bart. My new man isn't as rich, but he does things to me that you never did. So you admit you're a whore and a liar? I said, anger rising in my voice. So yesterday and today you were just having fun and didn't care about me. Kelly laughed. Yes, it was just for me. I deserved it all. Haven't you noticed that everything has always been just for me? She looked at me, and for a moment I thought I saw a flash of sadness in her eyes. We had many good years together. The look disappeared, and in its place there was malice again. But it's over with, Bart. I'm leaving. Kelly leaned toward me, and my world continued to crumble. Listen, Bart, don't make this hard on me. I'm asking for the house and most of the property because you're going to prison. So sign the papers, I'll be generous and give you a week to pack your things and move out. But by next week, you're out of this house or I'll add a restraining order to everything else. So you're going to stay with your lover? I asked, realizing the seriousness of what was happening. Betrayal at work, and now by my wife. She laughed again. Of course, his apartment is much smaller, so we'll rent yours out when you go to prison. But don't you dare bother me, or I'll call the police and have you arrested for stalking. You're already in prison. Don't make things worse. I pulled up a chair and sat down, shaken and rejected. Kelly took a few steps toward me. Then she noticed the red handprint that Myra had left there earlier. She looked at my red cheek and smiled. Well, at least that whore got out too. Die in a ditch, Bartholomew. With that, Kelly left. I did nothing for the rest of the day, not even drinking. The next day, I still didn't know what to do. I was waiting for something. I tried calling Grace, but her phone went to voicemail. After about the 20th call, she picked up. What do you want? My daughter's sharp voice rang out. Grace, I began. Leave it, Dad, Grace interrupted me. Her tone was sharp, almost sarcastic. Mom told me about your betrayal, your lies, your affair with your assistant. Seriously, cheating on Mom and stealing $200,000. You've ruined a lot of people's lives, and I can tell you that I've never been so disappointed in anyone in my entire life. I didn't know what to say. There was a moment of silence between us. But as soon as I gathered my courage and was about to start defending myself, Grace interrupted me again. Listen, I'm going to be blunt, Grace said heatedly on the phone. John and I want nothing to do with you. Last night, the news said the police were investigating you, and then Mom called and told me everything. Go to jail, Dad. Serve your time and stay away from us. I'm ashamed to say this, but if you're not in prison when we get married, don't come. I don't want the man who destroyed our family standing next to me on the happiest day of my life. I'll find someone else to walk me down the aisle. I didn't answer, tears streaming down my face. Dad, can you hear me? Do you understand how you've ruined everything? I didn't answer, but she could hear me sobbing. Goodbye, Dad. You're dead to me from this moment on. Don't ever try to contact me. I mean never. Without saying a word, she hung up. With those words, I fell to the floor and cried. 2 days later, the police came to my house, arrested me, and took me in for questioning. The detectives who arrested me didn't even ask if I had done it. Instead, they bombarded me with questions about where I had hidden the money, who my accomplices were, and how long I had been cheating my former employer. In the end, they let me go home but told me not to leave town because I had to appear in court the following week. I walked into the house and looked around. Photos of Kelly, Grace, and me on the walls, paintings we had bought, trophies Grace had brought home for her high school sports achievements. So many memories and good times now seemed empty and meaningless. The week passed in a fog. Deep down, I knew I was missing something in this situation. I knew I wasn't connecting the obvious dots, but other than my conviction that I was innocent, I had no idea what was going on. My wife left me. My daughter disowned me. I was fired from my job. My assistant accused me. Even a close friend treated me like shit and didn't even bother to call. The few calls I answered were from former friends expressing their disappointment in me. The scenario repeated itself over and over, and they asked me never to contact them again. I was poisoned. My very presence was unacceptable to them. I went to my bedroom in a depressed mood, with no idea what to do next. As an engineer, I solved problems, but I didn't know what problem I was solving now. After taking a shower, I went downstairs and ate a sandwich made of stale bread and jam, and the cardboard taste only added to my depression. Maybe I could have handled all this if Grace hadn't kicked me out of her life. I stared at the table in front of me. On it was the bottle of sleeping pills Kelly had used and an unopened bottle of American honey whiskey. For the first time in my life, I had a dark thought about what would happen if I drank and took the pills. I shook my head. That wasn't the solution. I just needed time. Early the next morning, I received another summons. This time, I was forbidden to come within 1 meters of Kelly, Grace, John, and Roger, and I had to leave the house by the following Monday. Despite my growing sense of helplessness, I was struck by the fact that Roger was included in the restraining order, which was strange. Why Roger? Something clicked in my head. I sent him a text message without thinking, overcome with rage and a feeling like an open wound in my soul. You're a bastard. This is all your fault. I'll beat you half to death. You call yourself a friend. I'll find you and destroy you. I heard nothing in response, but half an hour later, the same 2 detectives who had arrested me came back in and lectured me for violating the restraining order by contacting Roger. They weren't interested in my explanations. They didn't want to hear my story. They just wanted to put me in jail because, in their eyes, I was a bad guy. They knew I had to leave home by Sunday and said I would be in court on Monday. They said a car with a detective would be parked across the street and would be watching me for the next 24 hours. And they strongly advised me not to leave the house and just pack my things. When I got home after a more than disappointing farewell to the 2 idiot cops, I was ready to open a bottle of whiskey, 3 glasses in 10 minutes, and I drowned my sorrows. I took out 3 sheets of paper and decided to write notes to Kelly, Grace, and Maureen. To Kelly, I wrote that I was disappointed in her. I wrote what a treacherous whore she was, and that I hoped that when she died, she would burn long and painfully in hell for what she had done to me. I cursed her with every cruel word I could think of, then spat on the paper, folded it, and put it in an envelope. I wrote to Grace about my sadness and disappointment, that she hadn't even asked if I was guilty of what I was accused of. I told her that I had never done any of the things I was accused of. I had never cheated on her mother, but she had cheated on me. I told her that I had never stolen money, and that the fact that she could think I was capable of such a thing showed that she needed to grow up and realize who had told her all that nonsense. Then I softened my tone and told her to love John with all her heart and think well of me when everything settled down. Finally, I asked her to make sure Roger didn't walk her down the aisle instead of me, since he had betrayed me. This time, my tears stained the paper as I put the letter back in the envelope. I wrote to Maureen and apologized. First, I told her that she was not to blame. Then I told her a few things that I thought I knew about how Roger had betrayed us both, and that, in my opinion, he was now sleeping with my wife. Then I explained that I was sorry if I had ever made her feel uncomfortable with my furtive glances. I had meant only timid gratitude for her working with such an attractive woman, but I had the deepest respect for her and asked her forgiveness if my glances had spoiled that. In closing, I wrote that I felt trapped and asked if she could ever forgive me once her anger subsided. I sealed each letter in an envelope and wrote their names on them. Then I took a bottle of whiskey and a pack of sleeping pills and went to the bedroom. Sighing, I placed each letter on the nightstand, and then as if in passing, I attached a note asking the detectives to check Roger's finances if they wanted to know the truth. At the end, I wrote that next time they should do their job and not set an innocent man up for what I was about to do. I went to the bathroom and took a long, luxurious hot shower. I took a couple more sips of whiskey, then swallowed all the sleeping pills in one gulp, washing them down with another glass. I dried myself off, looked in the mirror, and wondered why I was doing this. I had never been like this before, but I had a plan, a way out of this mess. If the world no longer needed me, I would leave it. My razor was lying on the bench. It was a straight razor because I like to close shave. I picked it up, took another big gulp of whiskey, and went into the room, pouring the rest of the whiskey on the bed along with the empty pill bottle. I don't know why, but I put on my best clothes, pants, shoes, and a shirt, and then collapsed on the floor right in front of the bathroom. The whiskey and pills were starting to take effect. I turned the razor in my hand and looked at the sharp blade. The blade glinted as I contemplated its sharpness. Then I noticed that it hurt, but I knew it wouldn't help anyone to put up with me. They didn't want to see me. They didn't want to hear me. And I would make sure they never saw me again. Later, I was told that Detective David Roundlight had saved my life. He was assigned to watch my house that evening from an unmarked car parked across the street. When Mrs. Hawkins, one of our neighbors and probably one of the few people who didn't know what was going on, came to ask about us because there had been a lot of comings and goings that week. Detective Roundlight met her at my front door. Getting no answer, the detective opened the door and found it unlocked. He went through the house until he found me, bleeding profusely on the bedroom floor. Within minutes, an ambulance was called, and the house was turned into a crime scene. Looking back, I realized that was the first relief I had felt all week. When I was carried out into the street, I was barely alive. Fortunately, I was unable to suppress my gag reflex when I lost consciousness. I was found in a pool of vomit, alcohol, and blood. An investigation was conducted under the direction of Detective Roundlight. They packed up the whiskey, the pill bottle, the letters, and during a search of the house, they found 3 hidden cameras recording to a hard drive hidden in a linen closet. I knew nothing about this. I lay unconscious for 3 days, and when I woke up, I was surprised to find myself still alive. "Where am I?" I asked the pretty nurse in a squeaky voice. "You're in a private clinic in Hollywood," she replied calmly. Then she put her finger to her lips and whispered, "Quiet, quiet. Your friend was up all night and just fell asleep." "Friend?" I raised my eyebrows slightly. "I don't have any friends. Did they all abandon me?" "Not this one," she said, turning my head and revealing a very disheveled Myra, who was dozing awkwardly in one of those large faux leather chairs often found in hospitals. "Myra," I said quietly, relieved to see her. Hearing her name, she woke up. However, as soon as she noticed that I had opened my eyes, she came over to me and took my hand. "Bart, what the hell are you doing?" she snapped. But her hand was squeezing mine very gently, and her eyes were filled with tears, ready to spill over, although her red eyes told me she had been crying a lot lately. I turned away from her. "I thought it would be better," I began, feeling a wave of shame wash over me. She snorted. "You think killing yourself is the only way to save yourself, Bartholomew Drugi? I've known you for over 10 years. You've never given up this easily. What were you thinking?" She repeated her question. We were silent for a few minutes, hearing only the hum of traffic as she waited for my answer. Myra, I'm sorry for everything, for everything. When Kelly, then you, then Grace. I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't do anything, no one even asked me to. I felt like I was backed into a corner. My wife told me to die, my daughter said I was dead to her, my friend betrayed me, and I hurt and disappointed you. I wasn't thinking. I got drunk and in a moment of weakness did what seemed reasonable to me at the time. I shouldn't be here, I said sadly. She nodded, then carefully sat down on the edge of the bed. I'm sorry too, Bart, she said quietly, struggling to hold back tears. I was angry and upset, and I didn't stop to think for a second that you were innocent. I was wrong. It's all right, Myra. She pulled me close to her. No, it's not all right, Bart, that you're here, and that you feel I'm one of the people who made you this way. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself. This time she cried. It's okay, Myra, it's okay. I closed my eyes, exhausted. We were silent for the next few minutes. However, Myra didn't let go of my hand. Finally, the doctor interrupted us before we could think of anything to say. He smiled as he looked at my chart when I opened my eyes. Well, Mr. Oter, it's good to see you awake. How are you feeling? I shrugged. Alive. Didn't expect to be. He frowned, and so did Myra. Well, we'll see if we can keep you that way, he said, downplaying my unhealthy comment. He spent the next few minutes examining me. Myra stood to the side and watched as he untangled my wrists and checked the stitches. When she saw the wounds, Myra sighed. Then he took my blood pressure and adjusted the IV in my arm slightly. We're giving you mostly saline solution, the doctor explained. When you were brought to the hospital, you needed 2 blood transfusions because you lost a lot of blood. The saline solution will help your body produce the blood it needs and also keep you hydrated. You'll need to eat less for a few days. Unfortunately, when you arrived, we had to flush your stomach to make sure there were no pills left. It's not a very pleasant feeling. As a result, you will probably experience a painful itching that you won't be able to scratch, but everything will be fine. Finally, there is a detective who wanted to see you when you woke up. He has been here several times. Miss Brown spoke with him, he concluded, nodding toward Myra. When he finished, I looked down at the bed, and he repeated that I should lie still and not move. He put the bandages back on my wrists and left us alone with Myra. I couldn't look at her. I suppose you're here because of my letter? I asked. She shook her head. I haven't seen the letter yet, but Detective Roundlight told me about it, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. My cousin works here in administration and found your name on the intensive care patient list. He called me and told me you were brought here after a suicide attempt. Myra uttered the last word in a whisper. I still couldn't look at her, feeling only shame. Myra trembled, but continued. I didn't feel well anymore, Bart. I was still furious after I left, but I suspected you had nothing to do with the fraud. I had been your assistant for many years. If anyone knew you were capable of something like trying to steal money, it was me. But I should have stopped for a moment, no matter how angry I was. If I had stopped, I would have realized you had been set up. When my cousin Morris called me and said, I don't know what's going on with you, he told me you were here. I knew. I just knew you didn't do those terrible things. I'm so sorry, Bart, so very, 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 very deeply and sincerely sorry. Myra sobbed, her head buried in my chest. I could feel her tears soaking through my hospital gown. I heard her whisper that she was so sorry she almost lost her best friend. After a few minutes, she stood up and timidly wiped her face. This time, when she tried to pull her hand away from mine to wipe her eyes, I held it and didn't let go. Then she took another tissue with her free hand, gently wiped the tears from my eyes, and we smiled symbolically at each other. Myra took a deep breath. When I thought about it later, I couldn't understand how you could do that. You always loved your job, but when Roger showed me the signed documents, I was so angry with you. She sensed me tense at the mention of Roger's name and tried to look away. It was him, wasn't it? Roger set you up, didn't he? She asked quietly. I nodded. I think so. I can't prove it, but it all adds up. The fact that he didn't tell us about the overspending, the fact that he had documents I'd never seen before, it all fits. I also think he's having an affair with Kelly. I fell silent, closing my eyes, Myra's hand still in mine. I'm so sorry, Myra. I never thought Roger or Kelly would involve you in hurting me. But there's nothing I can do. All the evidence is against me. I can't prove my innocence. That's why I did what I did. I fell silent, and for a while no one spoke, until a new, unfamiliar voice joined the conversation. Well, I know you couldn't have done it. They did a good job of forging your signature and making you look like a criminal mastermind. But criminals who walk away with hundreds of thousands of dollars don't behave like you do. A large, very fit man entered the room. He looked like he played rugby and carried himself with a confidence that I thought I once had. Mr. Oter, I'm Detective David Roundlight. I found you with your neighbor, Mrs. Hawkins. I'm glad to see you're feeling better. I shrugged. I'm sorry, Detective, but I'm sure you'll be able to arrest me in a few days when I'm released, I replied bitterly. I felt Myra squeeze my hand tighter. About that, Detective Roundlight said. Myra and I looked at him. He raised his hand and ran it through his hair. I've been assigned to your case and I'm investigating it, and some things don't add up. Would you mind if we questioned you again? I guess so. After all, I have nothing to lose, right? I replied to the police detective. What about getting him a lawyer? Myra asked suddenly. Doesn't he need a lawyer? The detective sighed. Yes, he can hire a lawyer. We shouldn't say anything until he brings it up himself, but yes, he probably needs a lawyer. Myra nodded. She turned to me. Bart, I'll take care of everything. She left, letting go of my hand for only the second time since I had woken up. As she walked out of the room dialing a phone number, the detective and I watched her go. She might have been angry with me for what I had done, but she was still a walking dream, and we, both hot men, knew it. She likes you, Detective Roundlight said. I laughed. She's been working for me for 10 years. We've both had a pretty rough week, so she's just looking out for me. I think it's more than just looking out for you. Between you and me, I've read your letters and talked to her. She'll be a little devil to your wife if she ever finds herself in the same room with her. He glanced at the door she had come out of. She cares a lot about you, Mr. Oter, and right now, I think you could use a few people on your side. Detective? I asked, giving him a questioning look. He looked back at me. I don't think you should be telling me that. After all, you're the one investigating. He smiled. That's true, Mr. Oter, but I think there's more to your case than those two idiots you met thought. Besides, I heard your comments on the way here. You believe in your innocence, don't you? He asked. Except for the fact that I got hooked on illegal substances and did it myself. I raised my hand, showing the bandages on my wrists. Of course I'm innocent. I would never steal money from an organization I enjoyed working for so much. Well, he said when Myra returned to the room, Bart will be represented by my second cousin, Reagan Brown, she said casually. Detective Roundlight smiled and handed Myra his business card. I know Miss Brown, she's a good lawyer. She'll take care of you, Mr. Oter. He looked at Myra. Have your second cousin contact me as soon as Mr. Oter has spoken with her. The sooner, the better. We talked for a few more minutes, then he left. That was unusual, I commented when he was gone. Yeah, the police aren't usually so friendly and on your side, Myra agreed. We sat there for a couple more awkward minutes. Then I brought up a new topic. Who looks after Tilly when you're not there? She's at my mom's right now. Also, she reached into her purse and pulled out a drawing. Tilly drew this for you. She smiled and handed me the drawing. It was a folded piece of paper on which Tilly had drawn a hospital and an ambulance. Inside, she had drawn me in bed with crayons and written, "Get well," in 11-year-old handwriting. I wiped away a few tears. Thank you, I croaked. Any news about Grace? Myra shook her head. No, I've tried calling her several times. I left a few messages, but no answer, she said sadly. We talked quietly for about 45 minutes until Myra's cousin Reagan showed up. After introductions, Myra excused herself and left me alone with Reagan. Like Myra, Reagan was a beautiful woman. Her hair was sandy, not platinum like Myra's, but looking at them together, you could tell they were related. She likes you. She always has, Reagan said at some point in our conversation. Just like Detective Roundlight had said to me earlier, I snorted. She knows me and has worked for me for many years, I replied. This time, Reagan snorted. Men, they show what they know. I laughed. I think I have an ex-wife who proves I'm good for nothing, I replied, without humor in my laughter. She smiled sadly. Don't worry about it. I got some initial information and spoke with Detective Roundlight on my way here. Oddly enough, he's on your side. I also have a few theories about what's going on with you, so now that we've talked, Leave it to me. Your only crime is that you loved and trusted someone who probably shouldn't have been trusted. Reagan gave me a sympathetic look as she examined my bandages. I'm so sorry, Bart. I've heard a lot about you over the years from Myra. She respects you very much. And from what I've learned over the past week, she's more upset about how she treated you than she is about losing her job. You mean a lot to her. I started to ask a question, but she raised her hand. Don't worry, Bart, Reagan said. I'll represent you in your former company regarding your unfair dismissal. If I'm right, there will be a chain reaction very quickly. But as far as you're concerned, right now, in addition to getting your job back, I need the divorce papers filed by your soon-to-be ex-wife. Since I'm representing you, what do you need? My face darkened. I want as much as I can get, I said quietly. Reagan didn't pick up on the hidden anger in my voice. Kelly and Roger set me up and most likely got away with it by saddling me with most of the firm's debts. I give you every right to destroy them. She laughed and then winked. Take no prisoners and don't worry about the number of casualties, understand? I liked my new lawyer. Reagan spent a little more time with me. She asked me a few more questions about what led up to my suicide, as she called it, and then said goodbye, telling me everything was fine. Reagan told me that if nothing happened, she would contact me in a couple of days to arrange an official police interview once I was released. After the first week, the next few days passed rather slowly. I just lay in my hospital bed while doctors and nurses checked on me every few hours to see how I was feeling. I didn't have my cell phone. It was at home, so I couldn't call anyone. And I didn't think anyone would want to talk to me. But when Myra came the next day, she brought me an old paperback book, Dan Simmons's Endymion. I laughed when she handed me the book. I had read it many years ago and really liked it. When Myra handed me the book, I asked her what she was doing there, and she sat down on a chair next to my bed and took out her copy of Pride and Prejudice. Silly, I'm here to look after you, she replied, shaking her head but smiling. We chatted and told each other about our day. At lunchtime, with the doctor's permission, she went out and bought me roast beef with gravy and French fries and a chicken roll for herself. Despite the aching pain in my wrists, I was beginning to feel like myself again. After lunch, Myra left, but returned in the middle of the day, just as the doctors were removing the IV from my arm and informing me that I would be discharged the next morning if my blood tests were normal. I looked at Myra. I don't know where to go. I don't have a phone or a wallet to get a hotel room. I know I can't go home. Myra smiled. Speaking of home, Reagan got a court order to access some of your personal belongings. I was able to get your phone, wallet, a few changes of clothes, your laptop, iPad, and razor. Myra, I said, stunned by what she had done for me. Thank you. At least now I can find a hotel. I looked at her, my only friend in the world. What's wrong? I asked, looking at her worried face. She hesitated. You were right about Roger and Kelly. She fell silent again. When Reagan, the cop, and I went to get your things, they were both there. It looked like they lived together and weren't expecting guests. I'm so sorry, Bart, she said quietly. I sighed. It's okay, Myra. Well, no, it's not okay. But thank you for being honest. What happened when they saw you? In response to my question, she smiled again. At first, they started yelling at me to get out, until the police officer told them to back off, threatening to arrest them for violating a court order. Then the police officer allowed me to go into your room and get your things. Bart, the stain, she said, pointing to where my blood was probably still on the carpet. She took a deep breath. It's still there. If I hadn't been here with you since you came in, I would have panicked. Never do anything like that again. I raised my hands. I promise, I replied. The next day, freshly washed and shaven, I left the hospital where Myra was waiting for me, and we walked out together. She took my hand and led me to her car. We drove for a few minutes until we reached a residential complex in the Kings Park area. Myra, what are we doing here? Can't I stay with you? I asked, realizing where we were going. Of course you can, silly. You don't need to spend money on a hotel. You can stay in the guest room for a few days. Besides, Reagan is coming over this afternoon. She knows everything about your case, so I don't think you'll want to miss it. Myra smiled at me. I'd been to Myra's house several times over the years. It was a small 2-story house with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a modest kitchen, and a modest living room. Since only Myra and Tilly lived there, and my mother visited occasionally, they were quite self-sufficient and got along very well. Having worked with Myra for so long, I knew she only had a small mortgage left on the house. Despite her appearance, Myra wasn't a party girl, and I know she loved Tilly very much. Most of her money went to her. We carried my suitcases into the house. Then she showed me the spare bedroom, the bathroom, and everything else until Reagan showed up. Reagan arrived about an hour later. She walked in, sat down at her desk, and with a businesslike expression, pulled several folders out of her bag. "You, Bartholomew Other, are very, very lucky," she said seriously. I sighed. "Your wife and your best friend have almost tricked you into leaving with everything. Now I have to tell you that your bank accounts have been frozen. This includes your savings accounts and the account where the missing money was deposited. That account was opened fraudulently in your name." Mayra and I looked at each other. Reagan continued. "Apparently, over the past few months, your so-called friend Roger learned how to forge your signature, and a couple of months ago, he and your wife went to a local bank and opened an account in your name. I was able to obtain video footage proving that it was them. I have also filed a request to suspend their passports and have initiated legal proceedings against them for fraud and psychological abuse. They are in serious trouble," my lawyer informed Myra and me with a smile. "I have also initiated legal proceedings against your former employer for unfair dismissal of both of you, and I think everything will be settled by the end of the week. I spoke to Detective Roundlight, and tomorrow morning we will go to his office for an official interview." She looked at me. "It will be a routine procedure. Just follow my instructions and everything will be fine. I expect your wife and friend to be arrested shortly." Over the next hour, the three of us discussed the details and signed a number of documents. Reagan knew that all charges against me would be dropped the next day. When she left, I spent a few minutes unpacking my things in my room and putting my toiletries in the bathroom. Mayra and I spent the day discussing what we thought would happen next. Then, when Mayra left to pick up Tilly from school, I turned on my phone for the first time in several days. I was greeted by missed calls and text messages, mostly from Kelly, telling me how pathetic I was and that I should just sign the divorce papers before I ended up in jail. Even more interesting was that over the past 2 days, I had also received several missed calls from my former workplace asking me to call back as soon as I could. But, to my disappointment, there was nothing from Grace. When Myra and Tilly came home, I forgot about my worries because my 11-year-old daughter wanted to tell me about her day at school, what they had done, who she had played with, and how she had told them that I was in the hospital and would be living with her until I got better. She was full of energy, and I have to admit that I really enjoyed it. While Myra was making dinner, I sat with Tilly. We did her homework and then read her school textbook to practice reading. She was an excellent reader, and I enjoyed reading with her. Tilly was a mini version of Myra. I knew that when she grew up, she would be a heartbreaker too. She was so cheerful and innocent, and I hoped she would stay that way for as long as possible. We had dinner, took showers, and then the three of us sat down to watch TV before bed. Tilly was excited to show me the latest episodes of the children's series Blues. As an adult, I found it funny, and so did she. Tilly asked me to tuck her in and hugged me so tightly that tears welled up in my eyes. She said she was very happy, and when I let her go, I felt lighter. I had to wipe my eyes when I switched places with Myra, who also wished Tilly good night. Although it seemed like an eternity since I had felt such unconditional love, the fact that my daughter had betrayed me still hurt. Tilly's innocent concern for my feelings was a relief to me in the wake of losing touch with Grace. After that, Myra and I would sit back down on the couch and talk. She would often take my hand, and when we both turned to face each other, she would hug me tightly and tell me that everything would be okay. The next day, we had our interview. Detective Roundlight and Reagan confirmed that all charges against me had been dropped immediately after that. That evening, the news reported that Kelly and Roger were wanted on several charges, including fraud and identity theft. They have not been found yet. Later that evening, Grace tried to call me for the first time, but I switched my phone to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk to her. The next day was a bit bittersweet. Grace called me several times and even sent a couple of messages asking me to call her back. But I still didn't want to talk to her. She needed a cleansing process to start caring about me again. I was furious. She had rejected me without a second thought and then ignored Myra's calls while I was in the hospital. Now that it turned out that her desire to talk was the fault of her mother and Roger, my daughter could pay a little for her actions. However, that night, when everyone was asleep, I had a nightmare. I was at home, having just shaved with a razor, when Kelly and Roger entered the room and began to engage in intimate activities on the bed. Then Myra, Grace, and John stood in the doorway and taunted me as I lay there dying, unable to do anything. I woke up sweating profusely and screaming at the top of my lungs. Before I realized what was happening, Myra was standing next to me with her eyes wide open and a worried look on her face. Even Tilly was standing in the doorway with tears on her face. I covered my face with my hands and sobbed. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I can't. Finally, I began to calm down and they both climbed into bed with me. Myra climbed on top of me and stayed on one side, while Tilly snuggled up on the other. I felt Myra hug me. It's okay, Uncle Bart, Tilly said. You had a nightmare. It happens. Mom and I will stay with you. Go to sleep. I tried to fall asleep, but I couldn't. After a while, I felt Tilly fall asleep, her little hand resting on my stomach, but I could sense that Myra was watching me. Are you okay, Bart? She asked with genuine concern in her voice, continuing to hug me like a mother hen with her chicks. I thought for a moment, no, I'm sorry, Myra, but I don't think I'm okay. It was that dream. I mean, I couldn't say it. I think Myra understood what I wanted to say because she leaned over and kissed me on the cheek, then pressed herself against my neck. What are we going to do, Bart? She asked quietly. This isn't fair. You don't deserve this. I could hear the pain and hurt in her voice. Hush, I said, hugging her and pulling her close, trying not to wake Tilly, who was snoring softly nearby. We'll figure something out. Everything will be okay. At that moment, I felt like I had found myself again, if that made sense. Myra's pain and anxiety brought me back to myself for the first time since that night. I held Myra and Tilly until the sun rose and a new day began. The next morning, we had breakfast, and then Myra took Tilly to school. I used that time to start looking for a psychologist. I needed help. By the time Myra returned, I had already made several phone calls explaining that I needed help. Myra smiled at me with her widest smile, then smiled much more seriously. Bart, we need to talk, she said, leading me to the sofa, and we both sat down. I looked at her, then nodded, thinking I knew what she wanted to talk about. It's okay, Myra, I said. I understand that last night was scary. With Tilly here, it's not good if I wake up screaming. I'll find another place to sleep. Her eyes widened. She quickly put her hands on mine, and a look of panic flashed across her face. No, Bart, that's not what I wanted to talk about, she said, then took a deep breath. Actually, it's the opposite, Bart. I don't know how to say this, but I just have to. I looked at Myra, her expression painfully beautiful but confused. Bart, I'm in love with you, Myra suddenly blurted out. It was a real shock to receive information you weren't expecting. I'm sorry, what? I said like a dumbass. I said I'm in love with you, and I have been for a long time. She repeated it, this time more modestly, and blushed slightly. I leaned back in my chair, and she smiled at me sweetly, trying to read my thoughts from my expression. I'm sorry, Bart, but I can't hold it in anymore, Myra said, weighing her words. When I found out you were in the hospital, I went crazy. I couldn't get to you fast enough. I felt so guilty for yelling at you, telling myself I wouldn't tell you how I really felt, but you were almost dead. Your wife and best friend lied to you, and when you got out, you came here. And I decided not to say anything because you were here with me and Tilly. I thought that sooner or later you would figure it out for yourself. But Myra, why are you telling me what led to this? I asked. She laughed softly, but I heard sadness in her laughter. You silly little thing. It happened last night. You were in pain. It hurt me so much to see you like that, but I was there, and you fell asleep in my arms. I wanted to think that I could ease your burden. I was hurting for you, but I can't. Bart, I don't want to keep this inside anymore. Myra looked quickly into my eyes. Why is it always you? Haven't you noticed that I don't go on dates? She said, tilting her head to one side. Yes, I replied, tilting my head slightly to the side like a question mark. But I always thought it was because of Tilly, I said. That's partly true, Myra replied hesitantly. But Bart, I just could never find anyone who could compare to you. I tilted my head to the other side, questioningly. Myra smiled. Listen, she said. From the moment I started working with you, you never treated me any differently than you treated anyone else. On the contrary, you always took the time to explain things. You were kind to everyone and helped people learn from their mistakes. Whenever you saw Tilly, you were friendly and made her feel special, like helping her with her homework or reading with her. She never knew her father, but she sees you as her father. Look how she snuggled up to you last night because she knew you were hurting. But Myra, I stared at her. She raised her hand, cutting me off. When everything came crashing down on us last week, you didn't take it out on us. You didn't yell or scream. You didn't treat me badly when I threw a tantrum or when I hit you. Myra blushed. You're an amazing man, Bartholomew Other. I love you for that and for so much more. And if Kelly is stupid enough to leave you, I'll raise you so well that in a month you won't even remember that bitch's name. She came over and kissed me. It felt like time had stopped. Will you take me, Bart? Will you make me your woman? Myra asked. I had just been proposed to by one of the most beautiful women I had ever met. If I was honest with myself, I would admit that I had fantasized about her in the past. But it was all happening too fast. I knew there was nothing left between me and Kelly, and the fact that Myra had fallen in love with me was important because it made me feel like I wasn't such a loser, but I was afraid it would backfire on me. I think Myra understood my inner struggle, but she didn't say anything. She stood up, took me by the hand, and led me to her bedroom. Finally, once we were in the bedroom, we got down to business. After that, we fell asleep, and I had a dream similar to the one I had before. While Kelly and Roger were having fun on the bed, I began to despair again. Suddenly, Myra entered the room, ran her hands over my wrists, healing the wounds, and then flew out of the room, flying away from the place where anxiety and sadness reigned. We woke up to the sound of the alarm clock. I trembled and broke out in a sweat, but I didn't scream. While we were getting dressed, I told her about my dream. A worried expression appeared on Myra's face, and she took me with her when she went to pick up Tilly from school. Several more weeks passed. However, Roger and Kelly were arrested and taken into custody. They learned that the police wanted to question them after the charges against me were dropped. In a panic, they left Perth for Adelaide and were detained by Australian customs while attempting to flee the country. 2 months passed before the Western Australian police returned them to Perth. But during that time, I must say that my relationship with Myra improved dramatically. After that first night, I moved into her bedroom, which is now our bedroom, and I must admit that I felt like I was 20 again. I think it's obvious that I fell in love with this woman. When the police took Roger and Kelly back to Perth, I realized that Myra was right. It was hard for me to remember Kelly, and I didn't want those memories to remain in my mind. A month after that awful couple was sent back to Perth, Myra, Reagan, and I were in court testifying against Kelly and Roger. Roger never looked at me once, even when I was on the stand. In the end, he got 15 years. Kelly, on the other hand, never took her eyes off me. During the trial, it emerged that Roger had been the mastermind behind the whole thing. He had seduced Kelly and pushed her into fraud, so everyone was surprised when Kelly was given 20 years. She was found guilty of being an accomplice to fraud, but when she was charged with abusing me, she got an additional 5 years because of evidence found on hidden cameras that Kelly had installed for Roger. Immediately after the sentencing, the judge granted us a divorce. When Kelly handed me the divorce papers, Reagan stated that we would divide our savings. Reagan also stated that I was willing to sell the house and divide the proceeds immediately, as I had no intention of staying in a house where such terrible things had happened. Finally, Reagan also stated in court that I was willing to act as Kelly's trustee with regard to her funds until she completed her sentence. It took a lot of effort on Reagan's part to convince me to agree to this. However, it showed that I am willing to put up with some problems, and it largely prevented a conflict with Kelly's lawyer over the nonsense they often get up to in divorce proceedings. I was not allowed to use Kelly's funds. However, I was allowed to invest them along with any other funds I had invested elsewhere. The court sentenced Roger and Kelly to immediate imprisonment. In his closing statement after the sentencing, Kelly's lawyer asked that, as a sign of agreement, I spend an hour with her before she was taken to prison. After a few minutes of hesitation, feeling the eyes of the entire court on me, I agreed. Kelly was still in her courtroom attire when she was brought into the interview room immediately after the hearing ended. The room was fairly well furnished, although the table was bolted to the floor, and chains hung from the legs of the chairs to prevent them from being overturned. Nevertheless, when Kelly sat down, she looked as depressed and broken as I had during her betrayal. Her shoulders were slumped, and she did not look me in the eye, unlike in the courtroom. Her prison guards told us they would wait outside the door and that when we were finished, we should just knock. There was no need to rush. We sat in silence for several minutes. It was the first time we had been in that room since Kelly had asked me to do something that I had ultimately tried to do. "I'm sorry, Bart," she said quietly, looking at her hands. I was a little surprised that she spoke first and that her first words were an apology. Her last words had been the opposite. "Are you Kelly?" I asked, bitterness in my voice. She looked up at me, her eyes full of tears, but they didn't fall. "Yes, Bart, I'm sorry," I wanted to say and brush off her apology, but she paused, raising her hand. I waited and said nothing. "Please, Bart, let me explain, and then you can yell at me," Kelly said sadly. I leaned back in my chair and gestured for her to continue. "Thank you," she said haltingly, looking me straight in the eye for the first time in that room. "Believe it or not, Bart, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened to me. I loved you for so many years, and I still do, even though I did such terrible things. But the worst part is that I knew how much you loved me. You were the perfect husband and lover, but one day I woke up and felt, I don't know, a loss." She turned away from me and looked at her hands again, then continued speaking. "You know, I think it was a few weeks after I first felt that emptiness that everything started to spiral out of control. I became angry at you for still loving me even though I didn't feel the same way. Roger was working with you on that damn project when he noticed something was wrong with me." She began to fidget with her hands. Another month passed before the affair began. Roger was persistent. He knew how to push my buttons. I still loved you, but he knew how to play on my insecurities and get me into bed. After that, he used my guilt to carry out his plan. You see, I don't think you ever knew this, but Roger was always jealous of your ability to lead. He always felt like he was second best to you, and it annoyed him. He came up with the idea of getting a client to pay a lot of money for something that never existed, and pretending that you stole it from the company. To my shame, we both conspired against you and set this whole thing in motion. We opened a new bank account in your name and worked step by step to destroy you. We both knew that you were loved and trusted unquestioningly. And by the time everything had settled down, Roger decided that with you in prison, his money, our savings, and the stolen money, we could settle in another country. And if we were ever found, we would be out of reach, Kelly explained, shaking her head in confusion at her own words. "Meanwhile," I said, trying to hide the anger in my voice, "none of you cared that you were systematically destroying me." She nodded sadly. "Yes, at first I didn't want to, but Roger was ruthless. He broke me down piece by piece until I was ready, even if I wavered. For the plan to work, you had to be so broken that you didn't doubt anything." "You almost succeeded," I interrupted. "If it weren't for Detective Roundlight and Myra, you might have gotten away with it." We were silent for a moment. Then Kelly asked quietly, "Can I see them?" I understood what she meant and slowly placed my hands on the table, palms up. Kelly gasped and cried as she looked at my scars. She reached out to touch them, but then pulled her hands back. Outwardly, I sat impassive. However, inside, I was battling a whole range of emotions from rage to shame rushing through my head. It annoyed me that there was still a shred of love left in her, even after everything this woman had put me through, but I didn't want to admit it. Apparently, I couldn't hide my emotions because Kelly looked at me and tensed up. I'm sorry, Bart. I'm really, really sorry. I'm ashamed that I pushed you to try to kill yourself. I, she trailed off. I'm going to get 20 years with no chance of appeal. I deserve it after what I did to you." I nodded, glad she was willing to serve her time without question. She looked at me again. "Bart?" I looked at Kelly. "Just so you know, you were never a bad lover. You're amazing compared to Roger, who thought he was amazing but was almost useless in bed. It was all about him, and he never took the time to make me feel good like you do. I have no excuse for what I did to you that morning. I was wrong." We were silent for a moment. "So you and Myra?" she asked questioningly. "Yes," I replied, a little hesitantly. She smiled faintly. "Well, she's loved you for years, you know that," said my now ex-wife. "I only found out recently," I replied. I was surprised by the passion and pain in her voice when she said the following. "Let her love you, Bart. Let her heal the pain I caused you." Large tears streamed from her eyes, but she continued to look at me. "I know I have no right to give you any advice, but this woman loves you, and unlike me, she will never betray you. She has wanted you for many years and has never tried to seduce you. I failed in my first attempt. She is everything I am not," my now ex-wife said sadly. "Kelly, I didn't know what to say." "Don't worry," she said, wiping the tears from my face with her sleeve. "I'll be fine. I agreed to your terms. I was surprised that you were so generous and took care of my money while you were in prison. You're a better man than I could have ever imagined." I sighed. Kelly, I once loved you more than you can imagine. If you had talked to me about your feelings, maybe we could have avoided all this. But I'm trying so hard to forget everything you did to me. But just so you know, I still feel a lot of anger toward you. I want to yell at you. I want to strangle you for what you said to me. But I can't, Kelly. I'm the one who decided to kill myself, and I'm the one who's going to live with that. We were both silent for a moment. Bart, Kelly said when we'd looked at each other again, I'm sorry I treated you that way. You deserve better. And I'm just as much to blame for pushing you to do this, even more than you are, if we're being honest with each other. I'll always be ashamed of that. I saw the letter you wrote, and you were right that I would burn for what I did. But I'm grateful to God that you're alive. I clenched my teeth for a moment. The feelings boiling inside me were still strong. How could Kelly say that now? How could she take responsibility for her anger and resentment? It wasn't fair, so I changed the subject. I offered to take care of your money out of respect for our years together. You'll have enough to start over when you get out if you want to. I said this, trying to hide my emotions, but to no avail. Kelly noticed my clumsy attempt to hide my feelings, but agreed to change the subject, laughing bitterly. I'll be about 60 then. I hope that's enough to retire. 60 isn't that old, I said. Keep it up, and you'll be going strong at 80. We talked for a few more minutes about how she wanted to pass her savings on to us. It relaxed us both a little, but I sensed she wanted to move on to the next topic. Have you talked to Grace? She asked, hesitating slightly. I shook my head. Grace basically told me to go to hell, that I'm dead to her, and that I should accept the lies you and your lover have been feeding her as gospel. That conversation broke me. I looked at Kelly and she flinched when she saw the pain and sadness in my eyes. Kelly, she never asked me if I was innocent, never gave me the right to doubt, just kicked me out without a word. After that phone call, I stopped and stood up, suddenly turning away so Kelly wouldn't see my tears. If I had turned around, I would have seen that Kelly was crying too. She knew I couldn't say it. Turning away from Kelly, I continued. When I was in the hospital, Myra tried to contact her, but nothing. Then, like Kelly, I wiped my face with my sleeve and turned away, sitting down again while Kelly tried to wipe the tears from her face. I'm sorry, Bart, Kelly said, wrinkling her nose. Roger and I had a lot to organize. To my eternal shame, we planned for Grace to turn her back on you. I nodded. Kelly saw the flash of anger in my eyes, realized what she had done, and hung her head in shame. I was about to scold her for ruining my relationship with my daughter, but she already knew she had done that. Kelly had just admitted it openly. If it makes you feel any better, Kelly said sadly, Grace has cut me out of her life too. I haven't been scolded like that since I was a kid, but I know I deserved it, and more. Bart, Kelly said suddenly, the sadness in her voice replaced by something more insistent. Our girl needs you. She's scared and angry at everyone. She and John are fighting about everything right now, and you know it's not about them. Kelly said more calmly. I'm worried about her. It's my fault, but there's nothing I can do to fix it. I know she feels guilty about how she treated you, but the fact that you're not talking to her after everything that's happened is only making things worse. Kelly hesitated for a moment. Bart, I know I have no right to ask you for anything. Kelly paused and looked at me again, continuing to fidget with her hands. But can't you find it in yourself to forgive Grace? Our daughter needs at least one parent. Now I realize that even if I hadn't stayed away for so long, the guilt of what I did to you, and also of turning Grace against you, would have eaten me alive for the next few years, and in the end she would have hated me anyway, Kelly snorted. It's better this way. It's better that you're taking her away. If you died, I don't know what she would do. Please, Bart, for God's sake, take care of our daughter, my now ex-wife begged me. Kelly, I sighed and thought about what to say. What you're asking me to do is very difficult for me. You hurt me deeply, but you were my wife, not my sister. When Grace told me she wanted nothing to do with me, that I died to her the day you told me to die, it hurt more than what you did to me. I want to go back to her, but the pain, Kelly, the pain of what my family has done, what our daughter has done, I don't know how to deal with it. Kelly nodded. I understand, she said sadly, knowing that I was trying, but that I still had a long way to go. She understood the pain of rejection. She was going through it herself right now. I sighed as I looked at my ex-wife. Listen, Kelly, I'll try not to hate you. I'm seeing professionals, but even with their help, I have to fight hard not to yell at you or swear at you. As for Grace, I can't promise anything. but I'll think about talking to her soon. She looked devastated. Kelly seemed to have aged several years during that conversation. There was nothing more to say. She stood up. Bart, I know this won't help you right now, but I'll say it again. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I have no excuse, and I know I can never make up for it. I'll serve my time, and even though I may never be forgiven, I'll hope that one day you'll be able to forgive me. Kelly sniffed again, then looked up at me, her face clearly marked by wrinkles and the signs of age. You may not believe me, but I still love you and always will. Maybe I lost sight of that for a while, but I still love you. We stood there in an awkward silence. Tears streamed down Kelly's face again as she walked to the door and knocked. Her prison guard opened the door. Kelly paused and looked back at me. Love Myra, Bart. Give her the love I so foolishly rejected. Live beautifully and hold your head high. There are people around you who love you. Never forget that there will always be someone who cares about you, who will help you get back on your feet even in the hardest times. I lost that, but I'm proud of you, Bart. You're becoming yourself again. Goodbye, my beautiful man. I'll never forget you, Kelly said regretfully as she said goodbye. And she left the room. I thought about that conversation. There were no screams. Kelly took responsibility and accepted her prison sentence. When I left the room, there were streaks of small drops on the tile floor in the direction Kelly had gone. I turned around, mourning for a moment what had once been, then turned and walked in the other direction. I was led out of the secure area into the public gallery, and my mood immediately improved when I saw Myra standing there waiting for me. Even in such a solemn setting, my assistant, now a young woman, looked beautiful. Did everything go well? She asked. Yes, I replied. It was amazing. I was expecting a barrage of excuses and accusations. But she took most of the blame and showed a remarkable degree of remorse. What do you think about it? Myra asked. I thought for a moment, continuing to hold Myra in my arms. To be honest, I still feel a lot of anger toward Roger and her. But unlike Roger, I also feel sympathy for her. She knows she ruined her life and now she's paying for it. From what I can tell, Grace has also cut Kelly out of her life because of what she did. Myra nodded. She hesitated for a moment. About that, she looked at me. John and Grace are here. While you were with Kelly, John came up to me and said they'd be at the caf. Across the street for the next few hours if you wanted to talk. He knows how upset you are. Apparently, they had a big fight because of how Grace treated you. But she really wants to see you. I took a deep breath and looked at my beloved. You think I should talk to her, right? I asked. Myra nodded. Yes, my love. There's pain in your heart that I can't ease. Only Grace can do that, but if it helps, I'll go with you. I'll be there for you as long as you need me. And she smiled at me. If I have to, I'll scratch her eyes out. I love you, Bart. She spoke as if she were making a promise on behalf of the entire world. I leaned down and kissed her. I love you too, Myra. Her eyes widened. It was the first time I had ever publicly declared my love for her. Several people looked at us, lawyers, judges, and criminals passed by. But at that moment, I didn't care. All I could see was Myra. Let's go, I said, and we crossed the street arm in arm. When we entered the caf, Myra and I immediately spotted my daughter and her fiancé. When we approached their table, Grace couldn't decide whether to run for the hills or throw herself into my arms. In a way, I let her do the latter. I opened my arms, Grace pressed herself against me, and within seconds I felt my shirt soaking wet with her tears. I'm sorry, Dad, she repeated for several minutes. I looked at Myra, who was smiling, and at John, who didn't know where to look. Finally, after a couple of minutes, I pushed her away and we sat down at the table. We ordered drinks and something to eat, and I decided to start the conversation. I just talked to your mom, I said quietly. Grace nodded. I heard, Dad. I'm sorry, I raised my hand. Now it was my turn. I know, Grace, you're sorry. Your mom explained a lot, but you need to know that your words hurt me. Hurt me more than anything ever has. In that moment, I felt like I had no way out. One of the few people who I thought cared about me, no matter what, had abandoned me without a second thought. But what hurt me the most was that you didn't even ask if I was innocent. Grace blushed. Her embarrassment was clear on her face. Dad, She straightened her shoulders. No, I have to say. She was talking more to herself than to anyone else. I noticed that John didn't say anything, just squeezed her hand in support. Dad, I'm sorry. I should have given you time to respond. I should have let you explain. But I didn't. I can't blame Roger or Mom for my actions, but they told me how you ruined everything. That you were facing jail time, that you were having an affair. She looked at Myra. Mom, with Roger's help, kept telling me what a crook you were. They were convincing. By the time you called, I was so upset that I said a lot of things I regret now. John nodded. I assumed that was an important part of their argument. Dad, when Myra left messages saying you were in the hospital, I thought it was all a trick. After all, Mom and Roger were still bullying you and Myra was your accomplice. Grace looked at Myra, then at me. They said you just wanted attention because Myra was part of your plan. But it's true, Dad. You were trying to… She couldn't get the last words out. None of us could. I nodded, swallowed, and raised my wrist to show her the scars. I'm sorry, Gracie. Yes, I was at rock bottom and couldn't see a way out. At the worst possible moment, I got drunk and did something I now regret. I spoke slowly, swallowing hard, still finding it difficult to talk, but I knew I had to do it. I had to show my daughter what she had done to me. After my confession, Grace started crying again, sobbing into her hands. Myra pressed herself against me as both her emotions and mine were on the verge of exploding. No one said anything for a while. John looked at us. I don't want to downplay the seriousness of the situation, but I'd like to give Grace a chance to catch her breath and calm down. John looked at us and smiled. Can I assume that something good has come out of all this? He said, pointing to Myra and me, who were huddled together. Grace looked up and in a moment her eyes widened. Dad, you and Myra? She asked questioningly. Yes, I nodded, then felt I had to explain. But it wasn't an affair, like your mother told you. I never cheated on your mother. When I woke up in the hospital, Myra refused to leave me. You don't know this, but Myra also believed for a while that Roger and your mother were having an affair. We made up, and I realized how much this woman loved me. Myra blushed, but hugged me around the waist, then stood on tiptoe and kissed me on the lips. John smiled, and Grace looked at us with wide eyes, then seemed to come to her senses. Thank you, she said to Myra. Thank you for taking my father in and being there for him when I had bad breath. Myra laughed, and it lightened the tense atmosphere a little. We talked for the next few hours. Sometimes we discussed our trials from an individual perspective, sometimes from a group perspective. At one point, I even asked Grace to switch places with Myra so my daughter could hug me. I would like to say that this meeting healed all the wounds between us. But it took several months before we felt open enough to talk to each other without feeling like we were walking on eggshells. Grace and I worked on this, gradually rebuilding our father-daughter relationship. Grace even went to counseling with me a few times. The counselor helped us work through some of the issues and problems, such as trust, that we hadn't been able to resolve after our first meeting at the CAF. One of the most difficult sessions was about how I asked Grace not to cut her mother out of her life. Of course, Kelly was a manipulative and devious bitch, but she paid for her actions and was still her mother. Grace agreed to meet with her on the condition that I go with her the first time. It was a difficult meeting. We didn't talk about it much, as there was a lot of hurt between the three of us, but Grace made an effort, and the following week, Kelly wrote me a letter thanking me for convincing her. 6 months later, when things had calmed down, I asked Maureen to marry me. I proposed to her during a family dinner. Tilly and Grace supported me and said it was long overdue. John shook my hand and told me to take care of her. I laughed and he smiled, repeating the same phrase I had said to him. Shortly after that, Grace and John got married. With my consent, Myra visited Kelly in prison and asked if she would allow her to act as her mother. Kelly apparently cried, but agreed. Tilly did a great job as a flower girl and called everyone my second daughter. From that moment on, I was no longer Uncle Bart, but a father. Reunited with Grace, I walked her down the aisle and gave her away to a very proud husband. As we danced the father-daughter dance, I felt her press herself against me and whispered a prayer of thanks. That evening, I felt the last remnants of my reluctance to be around Grace disappear. Later, Grace even sent a series of photos and a letter thanking Kelly for letting Maureen perform in her place. I know Kelly keeps them on her wall in her cell. While the dust was settling after the criminal case with Roger and Kelly, Reagan negotiated a significant settlement for Myra and me in terms of work. For a while, Clarence refused to budge, claiming he had done nothing wrong, but a week before the trial, he made an offer that Reagan rejected. It was low and insulting. Then, 2 days before the trial, he made another offer, which Reagan rejected, but in the end, Myra received a six-figure sum and I received a seven-figure sum. For a multi-million-dollar engineering company, our payout was insignificant compared to the damage a public trial would have caused. However, rumors had already begun to spread, and Clarence's income declined significantly until he retired and sold the company for less than 30% of what it was worth when I worked there. With the money we got, Myra and I started our own engineering consulting company. We provided administrative and engineering services. Within 6 months, we had 5 people working for us, traveling all over the country helping with large engineering projects. Surprisingly, one of our first clients was Peter Pembroke. He invited Myra and me to dinner and apologized to us. When everything came to light, he realized that we had been deceived and admitted that without my supply coordination skills, the project would have almost failed. After that, every year, Myra and I were invited to all of Pembroke's important events, regardless of whether we were working on their projects. Peter was a good man who had found himself in a bad situation and wanted to make amends. We also sold Myra's small house and bought a much more spacious house near the road with a stunning view of Kings Park. It was an old house with 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, and we spent over 2 years renovating it. It was a fun time. We only took breaks for family holidays, our wedding, and the birth of Grace and Tilly's younger brother Byron. Life was good. I still had nightmares, but Myra was my rock and helped me when I needed her. More than 10 years passed, and Byron was now a 10-year-old teenager. Tilly was at university, following in Aunt Reagan's footsteps, studying to become a lawyer. Then, one lazy Saturday afternoon, Grace and John were sitting with us on the terrace of our house, overlooking Kings Park. Byron was playing Xbox with my 7-year-old grandson Bruce, and they were trying to ignore my 5-year-old granddaughter, Hope, when Grace brought up her mother. "Dad, I got a letter from Mom this week," she said casually but cautiously. Kelly wasn't a forbidden topic in our house, but everyone was careful when she was mentioned. Over the years, I had received several letters from Kelly and even visited her a few times. I knew she was in treatment and had a small community in prison. Despite having 8 years left on her sentence, she was respected as a model prisoner. "What did she say?" I asked. "Among other things, she said she heard last month that Roger was released," Grace said when everyone had calmed down. I silently took a sip of my Kraken and Coke. "Last month?" I asked, concerned. Suddenly, I felt Myra's hand on mine. "Did she say anything else?" Myra asked Grace. Grace nodded. "Yes, she said he came to see her. Mom says he looked unwell. According to the letter, Roger's inner world was not at peace. I'll visit her next week and find out what happened, but she mentioned that the conversation with him was unsettling." We talked about it for a few more minutes, then I excused myself and called David Roundlight. Over the years, he had become a friend. David was now head of the Serious Crimes Division and had solved several high-profile cases that had received widespread media coverage. "Bart, how's it going, my friend? How's your beautiful wife?" he said in a friendly tone when he answered my call. I smiled involuntarily. "Myra's fine." I paused. "David, I just found out that Roger's been released." I sensed that David had lost his cheerful tone. "Yes, I got the message yesterday. I was going to tell you about it at bowling next week," he said. David and I bowled on Tuesdays on the same team. From what I read in the report, he's been allowed to move to Adelaide. Apparently, he managed to get a job with a small company. During his probation period, he was asked about you and whether he planned to keep in touch with you. He replied that you could rot in hell for ruining his life. But he knew he had to leave because with his past, no one would hire him here in Western Australia. I sighed. Peter continued. The report notes that life on the outside was tough for him. He was involved in several fights, most of which he lost. Eventually, he became a librarian to stay away from most of the inmates. I don't think you'll have any problems with him, if that's what you're worried about. Thanks, David. That's what I was worried about. If he calls me, I'll let you know, I replied, unable to suppress a sigh. We talked for a few more minutes about bowling and the upcoming barbecue, then I returned to the table. When I sat down, Myra looked at me. "David?" she asked. I nodded. He confirmed that Roger is leaving and moving to Adelaide. But of course he hates me with a passion. I have to say, the feeling is mutual, I told my gathered relatives. The rest of the day passed fairly calmly, but I was with my family, and they made sure I felt their support. During the night, I woke up in a cold sweat, screaming from my first nightmare in years. In it, Roger came in at night and tied us all up. He pointed a gun at us and said he would shoot Myra, Tilly, and Byron if I didn't take the razor. I took the razor and was about to do what I had done once before when I woke up screaming. Myra woke up instantly. I was sweating profusely and couldn't stop rubbing my wrists while she tried to calm me down. Without asking, Myra called my therapist, who was very kind to answer the phone at 2 in the morning. Remember, that's what we pay him for. I told him about my dream, and Myra cried as she held me close. Although it upset my wife, just talking about it helped me feel better. My therapist listened to my story and noted that the dream was probably triggered by the news of Roger's release and the anxiety I felt remembering everything I had gone through more than 13 years ago. We agreed to meet again, and I thanked him for coming to pick me up so early in the morning. When we settled in, Myra checked on Byron, who, to our surprise, was still asleep. Tilly woke up, but when she heard us talking on the phone, she went back to bed and asked her mother to tell me that she loved me. I went to the bathroom and Myra snuggled up to me. "Do you really think Roger will be a problem?" Myra asked, slightly concerned. "No, I don't think so," I replied. "I think he'll leave and we won't hear from him again. And even if we do, you know we have protection." I hinted at my hunting gear, safely hidden in the closet. Myra nodded distractedly. "Okay, I'm sorry, my love, that this news upset you. Are you okay?" "I guess so," I replied. "Unfortunately, I think the shadow will always be with me. I don't think about those days as much anymore, but they will always be a part of me. But when I do think about those times, I usually think about the beautiful blonde who flew in and saved my life." Myra looked up at me. "I'm serious, my love." I told her, at that moment I felt so helpless that I felt like I had no other choice but to end it all. "I could have done it again if you hadn't been there when I woke up. I realized that I can't get rid of it. Ignoring it won't help. The best thing I can do is see my loved ones as often as possible and remind them of everything I'm grateful for, and talk to you when I need to so I don't end up in the same situation again." Myra nodded. "I love you, Bart," she said. "I love you too, Myra," I replied. With those words, we fell asleep, and although we didn't always live happily ever after, we had good days and not so good days. Yes, there were arguments and disagreements, and there were nightmares. But I realized that I had the unconditional love of a woman who did everything she could, friends who accepted me for who I am, and a family that supported me through life's storms. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for the next video.